Hello and welcome to the Garland Farms channel. Today we have Lisa, who is an ex-vegan, and I believe she also has had some experience with mycotoxins. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, well, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your experience with veganism, how you became a vegan, how long were you a vegan,
Yeah,
how long did it
sure.
take before you ended up getting health problems, etc.?
Okay. So I'm 56-year-old from the UK, mum of one. I was going back to sort of diet growing up. My own mother was very health conscious and really sort of instilled, healthy eating. Used to grow a lot of her own fruits and vegetables, but we did eat meat every day, every single day. Um, and as I sort of got older, I was growing up through the 70s and 80s, and it was a time when low-fat diets came in, and the sort of demonization of red meat and cholesterol, and I kind of, I kind of bought into that unthinkingly, really. And I didn't, through most of my adult life, I didn't eat much, if at all, red meat, if at all. If I did eat meat, it would be quite minimal amounts. And I kind of lost my way a bit in this balanced eating that my mother had taught me. And I ended up being very highly plant-based, and that kind of got worse when my son was little. At the age of 4, he decided that he didn't want to eat dead animals. He realized what he was eating, and there was nothing I could do to get him to eat meat for a time. And so we kind of, switched over to pretty much plant-based. I was still eating little bits of meat, but to try and make it easier to cook, I was cooking largely plant-based diets. I didn't feel that was that healthy for a child. He was probably eating more vegetarian, but didn't like eggs, wouldn't have fish. And but I did manage to get him to sort of eat some meat, disguising it in, like a bolognese or something like that.
Can I
So
ask a question?
yeah,
Can I
sure.
interrupt? Um, did he have exposure to Walt Disney movies like
Yes.
Bambi and stuff like that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And we're animal lovers. We have, animals. He's grown up with them, and he just couldn't get his head around, eating. One of the things he said to me was, "Mummy, do we eat our cats?" I was like, "No, we don't." But I could see, the issue there. And if I'm quite honest, I've never liked the idea myself. We weren't really exposed to farming. We grew up in towns and cities, and so there is this sort of complete disconnect these days with how children are brought up and knowing where their food comes from and sort of understanding all of that. So yeah, we went for a time where we were very largely plant-based. And my health by then, so I'm talking about in my late 30s, early 40s. So going back to sort of throughout my adult life, I had started to experience quite major sort of joint and muscle problems. And I was seeing osteopaths and chiropractors and physiotherapists sort of, every week at times. And things just seemed to start to drift further, into ill health as I sort of hit my late 30s and early 40s. And I started getting skin rash, and I started getting abdominal problems, which turned out to be gallbladder disease. No stones, just not functioning. I just quit functioning. And at the time, I had endoscopy. So, and it seemed to set up this really nasty reaction where I just constantly had indigestion, I constantly had reflux. And I tried the tablets, the PPI, proton pump inhibitors, and got quite a severe reaction to it. And I tried another one and I got quite a severe reaction to it. And a friend said to me, this is, I was getting liver pain, I was getting severe joint and muscle pain. I now know it depletes your magnesium. I was getting this chronic headache. Anyway, so a friend said to me, oh, for goodness sake, try and find a natural remedy. And so I Googled and found veganism as being easier to digest because you're not eating those dense proteins. So that's what I did. And there was part of me, although I've never really bought into the animal harms, I know that well, certainly in this country, we try and, kill our farm animals as humanely as possible. But there was a part of me that thought, well, at least, I'm not eating animals. I'm not killing out more animals for my diet. So very naive, really, about the whole thing. And that just seemed to, that's when my health just started to get worse and worse. And I started getting skin rashes. I started getting, what was it? Regular headaches and feeling like I had a hangover when I hadn't, I'd wake up with a hangover when I hadn't had alcohol. I started getting IBS. I did have my gallbladder removed because I was in constant pain where it wasn't, expelling. It was getting too full up, basically causing like pain all through my body. And I ended up having it removed. So it just kind of went down. I ended up with like quite severe diarrhea and IBS. And then what else did I have? Then I had a flu in 2019 and I got chronic hives. And then I had an dental operation at the end of 2019, December, and it just sparked off a whole host of symptoms. So looking back now, from what I've researched, I had histamine intolerance when I started to get the IBS and the skin rashes. I used to get very bad reactions to, like viruses. So my immune system was compromised as well. Somebody in the family would have it and just have a mild virus. I would be ill for 3 weeks and I would be coughing and coughing and coughing until I was nearly sick. And that's, sign of histamine and, high histamine when you get infection and not breaking down histamine properly. So into 2020, when I had all these reactions, I'm going to list all the symptoms if you can put up with that, because I actually had to list them down for my doctor. So I had constant hives, I had heart palpitations, I had racing heart, I had skin rashes, I had rosacea, I had full torso rashes, sudden crops of acne when I haven't had acne since I was about 15. Scabbing, itching, rash on my back, dry, peeling, cracking, dehydrated skin, burning mouth syndrome, chronic burning mouth syndrome. It was I would say mucous membranes, really, because it would affect all of my sinuses. There'd be this burning feelings, eyes really sore and dry, stuffy blocked sinuses, running nose, IBS, quite severe diarrhea again, but it really sort of escalated. I had blood pressure crashing, so that I could sort of go down into the 70s, over 40s, and just have all the associated sort of symptoms of that. Other times I would just have dizziness and low blood pressure and dizziness and sort of feeling faintness, extreme fatigue. I got to the stage where I would have a reasonable night's sleep. I would wake up and feel like I'd been drugged, like I was just coming round from being drugged. And I quite often would be so tired and so like woozy, and you know, I would go back to sleep for 2 hours and then I would wake up feeling the same, you know, or not much better anyway, slightly better but not much better. And then I had this, you know, quite major problems with, you know, cold, feeling freezing cold a lot of the time. I had hair loss. That did come after I'd had COVID in December 2020, actually. So that was sort of a year on. But I was going through all these symptoms for such a long time. I did try and research, and the doctors were just kind of a bit useless. We were going into 2020. They didn't, you know, they referred me to an allergy test, which was 6 months hence. So I did a lot of research and I found out about histamine intolerance. And looking back, I thought, yeah, I had a lot of the classic symptoms of histamine intolerance. I then found out about mast cell activation, which is like a escalation, if you like, of histamine intolerance. So the two kind of go hand in hand. So you have problems with histamine if you have quite commonly, if you have certain genetic mutations, one being the diamine oxidase enzyme mutation, or the HNMT, which is, I can't remember the name. It's another form of degrading histamine. So your body makes these enzymes, I think, in your liver, in your kidneys, in your gut, and they break down toxins. And histamine, anything that is building up in your body to an excess level is toxic. So your body's got to get rid of them. And certain people have these genetic mutations, and then that makes them more prone to histamine intolerance. And if you are deficient in quite a number of nutrients, it can be any number, then you are far more likely to suffer problems, because these enzymes are dependent on good nutritional levels. So, for example, the diamine oxidase enzyme is copper dependent, and I was later found out I was copper deficient. So you get histamine reactions to foods that are sort of long, quite often animal products, but they are long, you know, sort of long storage. So aged meats and cheeses. I'm just trying to think what else. Anything that's stored above 0 degrees in an animal product will break down, and the histamine levels will raise. So certain fish and seafood are very high. It can be very high in histamine, and quite often people think they've had a seafood poisoning when it's not. It's just a histamine poisoning. And other foods like fruits and vegetables can be, you know, ripe fruits can be very high histamine, like bananas, avocado, tomatoes, strawberries, other berries. And so you have this problem where you're building up too much, your body can't break it down quickly enough, and then you start to get, it builds up to toxic levels and you start to get reactions. Then if then through other mechanisms you end up building up a very, very high level of histamine. So mine came with an operation. So if you think injury, an operation is an injury which it causes your body to release histamine to go to the site of injury and help, you know, like the white blood cells get through. Toxins, so I was anesthetized, so that is toxic to the body. Your body can't break it down, so you release histamine to toxins. I also had obviously this low level of nutrient and wasn't able to break it down. I also had a mild virus at the time. Again, viruses can release histamine, so it goes in to fight the virus or the bacteria or whatever. So all of this kind of all at once just proved too much. And then your mast cells, which release your histamines, all the inflammatory chemicals, they can get activated and just start randomly releasing excess levels of inflammatory chemicals, including histamine. And then you start reacting to not just food, but to environmental triggers as well. And I don't think I mentioned, I got very chemically sensitive. So I could not have any fragrances, any household chemicals. I couldn't walk down the aisle in the supermarket where there were household, laundry products and things like that, because it would smell overwhelmingly toxic and poisonous and make me feel nauseous. It would start off the burning in my mouth, nose, eyes, and could lead to sort of feeling faint and headaches and things like that. So that was kind of full-blown mast cell activation. Some people suffer more with respiratory. Important to say, all of these things can vary greatly depending on individual sort of weakness. A lot of people actually suffer anaphylaxis without any allergy, just to high levels of histamine and mast cell activation. Unfortunately, I didn't suffer with that. So excuse me. I did learn to kind of manage my symptoms by going on a low histamine diet, and so everything had to be cooked really fresh, and from frozen. I couldn't buy meat that was aged. I couldn't eat beef. I couldn't buy meat that had been left in the supermarket. I had to go to a butcher, a farm shop, and say, when is this meat come in? And I had to have it they would go out to the back freezers for the most recent, the freshest meat. When I explained, ironically, butchers knew more about histamine intolerance than any doctor I'd come across and any specialist I came across. So that was quite telling. So I managed it kind of with cutting out histamines. I also seem to be reacting to things in plants called salicylates, which are the plant's own defense chemicals. So I ended up cutting those out. I was down to about 10 foods basically that I could tolerate without reaction. But even then, sometimes I would be getting the burning mouth with unexplained reasons. The heat would affect me, things like the itching and hives, and low blood pressure would be caused by heat as well as food and things. So I wasn't clear. And then finally, going into 2021, somebody recommended a functional nutritionist who I was at the end of my tether. I'd been through all of the NHS referrals in the UK, a year's worth of allergy referrals, burning mouth, oral specialists referrals, dietitians who declared my 10 foods were perfectly healthy because I'd somehow managed to sort of get some protein in there and some fruit and veg. So, it's just ridiculous, really. So I found this functional nutritionist, and he did a load of tests. He did a very thorough sort of what do you call it, where you fill out all the symptoms and issues and diet and things like that. And he recommended a whole raft of testing, including allergy tests, because even though I said no, they've come back negative. He said he used a company in the US. He said they're much more sensitive, level of tests, and they look at cooked food proteins, not just because they're more allergenic than raw food. And he did all sorts of tests, and it came back. I've written a lot of this down because it was so complex what kind of went wrong. So he came back to me and said I was deficient in copper, magnesium, iodine. Even though I was supplementing magnesium, I was suboptimal in B12, folate, selenium, zinc, vitamin D, and that's just the ones we tested. And I was taking some B12, and I had gone back to eating some meat by this point because my diet was so restricted. So I was eating just kind of fresh chicken and white fish, and then we knew that I had genetic variants because I'd done the 23andMe genetic testing, and I showed up with the diamine oxidase, the HNMT, the MTHFR variants. And even though I was supplementing, so MTHFR variant means that you don't absorb B12 and folate, or probably a lot of B vitamins from synthetic supplementation or from plant food. Well, not that you can get plant-based B12, but folate, and I from leafy greens and pulses, and I was eating a lot of those. So, it just shows you how little was kind of getting through and was utilizable. So yes, these variants did make me more prone to having these kind of issues, but it's not that I'm rare. This is a very, very common. These are very, very common variants. The DAO enzyme and the MTHFR is something like 40% of the population, because we evolved in a very clean, green environment. And, so our enzyme production is based genetically on that. It's not based on all the toxins we're exposed to today. And so then that kind of compromises your ability to break down environmental toxins, dietary toxins, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so he also said I was anemic. Important to note that I wasn't deficient level of iron. I was deficient in copper, and copper is you need copper basically to transport the iron around and to make it bioavailable. Otherwise it can just build up in your tissues. It can be just swimming around uselessly in your blood, not getting into your cells. So I was anemic from that perspective. I had slightly raised enlarged red blood cells, and can't remember the other thing to do with blood cells, but that's a sign of B12 and folate deficiency. I had adrenal dysregulation, so I was below normal. This is why I was so chronically fatigued, and I felt drugged when I woke up. My adrenaline levels were right down below normal for early part of the day, when they should have been quite high. So you give me a bit of get up and go, and then they tracked the lowest level for the rest of the day and only raised sort of, I don't even think they went into normal level late in the day. I had thyroid dysregulation, so subclinical hypothyroid, which was causing probably the temperature dysregulation and the feeling freezing cold and the skin issues and the hair, maybe the hair loss as well. So I had a borderline low abnormal T3, so it wasn't being converted. T4 was okay, but it was not converting into the T3.
Was there any discussion of iodine around?
Yeah, well, I was iodine deficient, yeah, but also it's not just iodine to convert that T4 into T3. It's other nutrients. Selenium, yeah, was one. I can't remember the others. I had toxin levels that were slightly elevated for lead, mercury, and nickel. I could sort of understand lead and mercury because I had amalgams and I subsequently had those removed. I had done lead paint. I had stripped lead paint from a house. It was 20 years ago, but it can take a long time. And again, if you have exposure to these toxins, your body wants to get rid of them, and if you can't break them down properly because of compromised detox capacity, compromised enzymes, then it stuffs them away, probably in your fat cells. I think it is. Nickel, I've never had exposure to nickel, and I understand now that you can get, lots of plants actually have, higher levels of nickel. And then we did the mycotoxin test, and I had several that were elevated. So sort of, not a good thing. And then I had one that was off the scale. And basically that's when we realized kind of what was going on. So again, people have genetics that make them very poor at breaking down mycotoxins. So you get this buildup, but the whole thing goes back to the lack, the low nutrient levels.
No, go ahead.
If that makes sense. So yeah, so you need the nutrients to actually, for the enzymes and the detox pathways to work properly and function properly. Otherwise you get the issues that I've had. And it just makes complete sense now. He said to me, his treatment was, you need to eat meat, you need to eat animal products. Unfortunately, I forgot to say about the allergies. I've become allergic in this time, I think, with this hyper, activation of mast cells and the mycotoxin exposure. I've become allergic to 30 odd foods. So it wasn't just the histamine. It was not severely, but that was bumping up my histamine levels. That was the cause of a lot of the burning mouth issues. Although I know now from sort of trial and error that high histamine foods can do it, but the allergies also do it, because you've got a larger number of mast cells in your mouth and nose and eyes, because that's where you are liable to get infection from, or consume toxins. So that's the sort of early warning.
It's like
signal.
Your first line of
defense. Yeah, so that's what was causing all that. So he said, you need to eat red meat, you need to eat organ meat, and you need to supplement initially, because once you are deficient, you can't just get those nutrients back up to sufficient levels by eating, just a natural diet. You have to supplement, and for quite some time, to get them back to like sufficient levels. So initially I supplemented for about 6 months. Also eliminated all the triggers, the high histamine foods, the allergens, and then I was in, a good state of remission, but I had to do a detox protocol, because what the mycotoxins do is they knock out your hormone function, they knock out your detox capacity further, because they I can't quite remember what they do, but you need glutathione to detox mycotoxins. It's like the master detox enzyme, and the mycotoxins actually knock out I don't know whether it's because your body uses them up so rapidly trying to detox mycotoxins, or they have some other inhibitor, can't say that word, inhibition on your inhibitory, that's the one, in your body. I don't know, but I've done 6 months protocol, infrared saunas, nebulized glutathione. You can get a specific product only for nebulizing, probiotics, phosphatidylcholine, binders, and so I would take the binders sort of night and morning, but I would fast until, so I wasn't taking the binders when I was eating food, that it could find actual nutrients in the food. So as soon as we didn't do the detox straight away, we did the mycotoxin test was a bit later on. So it got to a state where I was better when I didn't eat those allergens and histamines, but if I did, then it would just, cause a problem again. I still had the chemical sort of sensitivity, and so then we did the mycotoxin test, and it showed what the problem was. But just going on a meat meat-centric diet. I wasn't completely carnivore initially. Within a few weeks, I felt amazingly better. I could get up in the morning and have I could do exercise without being really exhausted and things like that. So yeah, I just got better from there, really. And then he explained about the lack of nutritional availability of in plants, and I've done a huge amount of research since and looked at studies. I've read articles, because it was such a shock to me that the way I've been brought up, the way that all health professions tried to sort of instill into us was completely and utterly wrong. I'm just going to give you an example, a few examples of what I found out. And I haven't looked into this in any huge way, because it kind of, I could see what was happening all the way through my sort of decline in health. So obviously, I did research the deficiencies of a vegan diet, and basically, obviously, you can't get B12, hence why I was supplementing. But not everybody, as I said, can absorb the tablet form unless it's methylated, and even then, I'm not absolutely sure whether it's as well absorbed as through animal products. There's no D3, there's no retinol. And you'll have vegans say, oh, but you eat your brightly coloured fruits and vegetables for beta carotene and you can convert it into retinol. Well, I found out that there was a study done in the UK, and 50% of the people tested could not do that conversion. So that's correct. 50% potentially of all vegans are going to be deficient in retinol. There's obviously no D3, and there's no EPA and DHA. And again, vegans will say, oh, well, you've got your alpha linoleic acid, and your body can convert that into, you get that in nuts and seeds typically, and your body can do that conversion and make your EPA, DHA. No, it can, but it's incredibly low. It's not even worth bothering, quite frankly. Things like B9, again, it's not absorbed at all if you've got this MTHFR deficiency through the tablet form. You need methylated, and again, probably ideally the food source, animal sourced folate. In my course of my research, I've found that choline is linked to gallbladder disease. Choline deficiency is linked to gallbladder disease. So I never ate any eggs. I was not eating red meat. I was never eating any organ meats. So I probably was deficient in choline. It's okay. Again, there's probably a genetic relationship. My mother had it. My brother had it. Have all had our gallbladders removed. But it's likely to be only a genetic issue if you're deficient in those foods, in those nutrients, in choline.
Someone in the comments asked if you became vegan for ethical reasons. As I recall, your son, that might have been the case, but for you were just following the standard advice on what's the healthiest diet, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I can't say there wasn't a part of me that didn't think, oh, well, at least I'm not consuming animals. But, I knew enough to understand that, being vegan isn't saving harm to animals, really. It's just, it just makes no sense. And obviously from watching your channel, I've really sort of come to understand the full impact of, agriculture on animal habitats and, crop deaths and, whether you're organic farmers or not, and so on and so forth. So yeah, lack of heme iron. Again, I sat down one day and worked out, okay, so what potentially could you get? What's the potential level of iron you could get from a vegan diet? So the Vegan Society recommended chickpeas as a good source of iron, and I looked at the recommended daily allowance for iron for women, which was 18 milligrams. And then I looked up the bioavailability of iron, and found it was very, very low. And you need at least a kilogram to reach the recommended daily allowance of, which who can eat a kilogram of chickpeas or any other pulses, to be quite honest. And it's not even heme iron. We need heme iron. We don't need non-heme iron. Yes, we can probably do some conversion, but again, it's probably low. I haven't looked into it in any great detail.
Yeah, I've looked into that, and there's an 8-step enzymatic process that's required. So it's not just the vegans will say, well, in order to get the same amount of iron as what you can get from heme iron, you have to just consume twice as much of the non-heme iron. But the part of the story that they're failing to tell you is that once it's absorbed, now you've got to convert it to heme iron. That's an 8-step enzymatic process. All of those enzymes are proteins and are made of amino acids. So if you're deficient in any of the amino acids, which on a vegan diet you would be, then those enzymes are going to be in short supply. So it's difficult for vegans to turn non-heme iron into heme iron. Go ahead.
And I did have lowest levels of iron as well, and that was partly due to the copper deficiency, because it makes it harder to absorb, but also you haven't got the iron transport. So it just, and we're just talking about iron there, you've got to look at it like that for every single other nutrient. And and that's not even taking into account, as you said, the generally low levels of nutrients. There's huge variability in the levels of nutrients. You can just Google and look up iron in this product, and you'll have 5 different answers. It depends on the conditions it's grown in, it depends on the soil it's grown in. And I've seen studies that have shown that nutrient levels in our food, our plant foods, have gone down massively since we have had intensive agriculture, because they don't put the nutrients back into the soil. They only do NPK fertilizers. We're not feeding it with animal manure, so you're missing out on all of that, and all of the potentially sort of micro, whatever they're called, the things in the soil
life.
The soil life, which
bacteria,
will help,
protozoans,
will help,
nematodes,
all sorts. And so it's low level of nutrient, need huge amounts to get the recommended daily allowance. It's in the wrong format for human consumption, and plants absorb toxins. Rice, has arsenic in it. Cruciferous vegetables can be very contaminated with things like lead, nickel, hence why potentially I had the nickel elevated, because no exposure elsewhere. Cesium and thallium, even aluminium, arsenic. And again, people, health professionals will say, oh, well, it's only a small amount. But if you are deficient and you have your enzymatic processes compromised, you can't break them down properly, and we don't even know that you could anyway, even if you had the highest level of health. And of course, everything's coated in pesticides. Then you have plant toxins that are not great for our health in some cases, like the salicylates, like the oxalates. like the lectins, which can damage your gut health. And you've got all the anti-nutrients in plants, such as phytates, tannins, lectins, which bind the nutrients, impair digestion. You've got protease inhibitors, which interfere with absorption of protein. The oxalates bind calcium. So yes, again, people say, oh, well, you can get around that by soaking them and cooking them and fermenting them. But nowhere have I found, anywhere that says you can get rid of them completely. It says reduce, it can reduce. But, so basically you're left with not knowing what level of nutrient is in the plant and what level is, affected by all of these anti-nutrients, and what level is going to be left for you to absorb afterwards. So, and again, I see vegans saying, oh, my blood tests are perfect. Blood tests are the worst way to find out how nutrient sufficient you are. Again, this was conferred to me by my nutritionist. He said that it just shows what level is in your blood. Your body is an amazing, has amazing capacity to release things like, you say, calcium. You need calcium for your heart to work, to function. So it's important you have a high level of calcium, or a sufficient level of calcium in your blood. So if your diet is deficient, your body will draw it out of your bones. And so your blood level looks fine and it's masking a deficiency. And it's the same for a lot of nutrients like that. He said blood tests are just a waste of time, really. And besides, there's such a wide range. So by the time you're deficient, he said you've reached a car crash level of health. The range is for to stop serious, below which or above which serious disease is starting to occur. So they have these massively wide ranges, and it doesn't show what's being utilized, what proportion of that nutrient is actually getting into your cells where it's needed to function. So yeah, basically I would say to anybody that says, oh yes, you can get all the nutrients you need from a well-planned vegan diet, I would tell them to shut the F up, because they have not the first clue.
Yeah.
And that's health professionals as well, because they have studied nutrition, so they've studied the crap that's gone before. They haven't looked into it in a in that sort of way, and I've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, well, it's like I told someone the other day, doctors are not educated in optimal human nutrition at all, and the little bit that they get is the truth turned upside down. And for a doctor not to understand human nutrition, which is the status quo, it's as if all of our car mechanics were not educated on motor oil or gasoline. Just the very basic, what would be required for any vehicle to operate optimally or at all. If our car mechanics were ignorant in oil and gas, then we wouldn't even be going to them. We would be taking responsibility for the function of our vehicles ourselves. And I think that's what a lot of people, you were lucky to find this nutritionist, this functional nutritionist who was thinking outside the box and was actually understanding human biochemistry. That probably saved your life. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely, because it was just a further and further downward spiral. Basically, it was just, I think the one thing that helped me was because I had a sudden escalation of issues after that operation, and I kind of, in my head, I thought, well, I might have, I sort of found out about the the variants, the gene variants. I might have those, and that might account for why I've had a lot of sensitivities to things through my life, but it doesn't actually explain why I've suddenly had this kind of massive escalation. And it was kind of researching that got me onto, well, nutrition is off, and I didn't realize how far off. I thought, oh, just eating more plants would probably solve it. And you can't possibly know what's going wrong. You can't, if you're not if you're not functionally trained like that, you cannot possibly know the effects of one thing knocking onto another. And I will add, because you started this with the mycotoxin thing, and one of the things I found out was that yes, all of our agricultural, plant foods can be contaminated. And again, people say, oh, well, but it's only a minor amount. But it's the same as everything else. It's a minor amount to who? To what,
Right.
Depends what their physiology is, depends what nutritional deficiencies they've got.
In other words, they're giving this one size fits all advice, which if you're a doctor and you have a scientific mind, you're not going to be giving a one size fits all advice. It might be a little bit, it might be a lot. It depends on the specific food at the time. It depends on the specific individual. And so, go ahead.
So I mean, the other thing with the mycotoxins was you commonly see mast cell activation, and I should say CIRS as well, which is CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. I'm not quite sure. There is quite a big overlap. I'm not quite sure. The differences. I think mine was just mast cell, but there could be elements of both.
Let's take just a minute, because there's some people watching that aren't aware of mycotoxins.
Oh, so
what are they? Tell
mold.
us what they are.
So what? They come from mold. And,
mold. What are the foods in our diet that's highest in these mycotoxins that are coming from mold?
Quite a lot of dry. Well, if you think about food storage, if it's grains or dried nuts, seeds, coffees, teas, they are very prone to mycotoxin buildup when they're stored, because they will have some degree of mycotoxin exposure. And then when they're stored, if they're not stored in absolutely the right conditions, which I think is very hard to achieve anyway, they can build up higher and higher levels of mold toxins. Now, the toxins are the mold's defense chemical, so they produce them and they're called toxins because they are dangerous, and they're to defend off animals eating them, basically predation. Some are way more toxic than others, and your body then has to sort of deal with this kind of toxic load in addition to all the toxins we have in our environment anyway. You can get high levels of mold toxicity from water damage, but that wasn't the case for me. I live in the UK. I live in a solid brick and breeze block house. We don't have we don't have cellars that can tend to get damp and water ingress. We don't have the high levels of humidity that you can in heat and humidity that can make your building. I know a lot of buildings in the US can be quite prone to mold contamination. So I only found a little bit So there's a bit in my washing machine, admittedly, I couldn't seem to sort of get rid of. I was putting these tablets in and doing a tub clean program, and it just wasn't going. And I think it's because they have low levels of water, so it wasn't washing the tub clean tablets around it properly. We had to take the machine apart. I found a little bit behind the taps because I was in my shower room, and that's potentially because I'm not using I'm using natural sprays in the bathroom and kitchen and things like that, but nothing.
Can I recommend something that you might try? Is
Sure, yeah.
chlorine dioxide.
See, I can't use bleach because, again, I was really sensitive to that, and that was set off all the. So that's why I went for the.
Well, bleach and chlorine dioxide are two different things.
Oh, okay, right.
So it's a completely different chemical than the bleach that you put on, that you can buy at the store for washing clothes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to look into that. If I find anything, I'll share it with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have been using a mold. Again, it's a natural mold killer, and that seems to be okay. But yeah, it's useful to know, I think, for people to know what the potential is. I also use citric acid seems to work quite well, but I feel like I need to put something down the sink trap and, on a regular basis, because if it's building up like behind my taps or something, then it's potentially building up, down the waste and what have you. But I honestly don't believe that was a huge problem, because there was only minor amounts of it. We've never had that water damage, which is commonly where I know people in the US commonly get these mold or mycotoxins. Just to explain the mycotoxins, how they operate. So if you disturb the mold, it fires out trillions of these toxins. And so you can clean off the mold, but the toxins spray out into the air, and then they land on every surface. So then you vacuum or you dust the surfaces and you stir them up again. So you're kind of, you have to make sure you've got control of it. And you're not. We actually did like a full remediation, as it were, where we sort of cleaned every single surface. I was masked and gloved, I have to say. But yeah, I think there is a large element in our food. I know it's in tea, anything that is like
coffee, tea,
coffee, things that come from.
I noticed that you can. There's actually you can buy certified mycotoxin free coffee and tea. Yes,
I do now. Yeah. Well, I don't drink tea anymore, but I have gone back to drinking coffee, because that was one of the worst things for setting me off. And this is why I think I did drink a few cups of coffee a day, maybe 3 cups of coffee a day prior to all this. And teas and coffees were one of the worst things for setting me off. Now I've switched to a brand in the UK that is certified mycotoxin and pesticide free, and that doesn't cause a reaction really. I do take it with the binders, actually, the activated charcoal and the other binders that were for I'm just trying to think what they were. Oh, it's gone. Anyway, zeolite, that's it. So I actually have a slug of that before I have my coffee in the morning, and I'm fine. But if I go out and I drink a coffee elsewhere, I can get the immediate sort of mouth burning. It's not as severe, but noticeable mouth, nose and eyes reaction. So I think that's probably mycotoxin exposure. And I actually one of the allergies was mold allergy. So again, mildly allergic. So I'm coming into contact with it in my coffee that potentially. But yeah, it does seem to be, I'm in a group with thousands and thousands and thousands of in the UK and in the one in the US of people worldwide that have these issues, these intolerances, mast cell activation. So I think it's a far bigger problem than any health professional or health body is aware of. And I mean the whole issue of deficiencies and overactivation of mast cells, and there are health professionals who believe it's linked to a lot of chronic diseases. So like irritable bowel disease, people will have a higher level of mast cells in their gut. And what's triggered that? We know that lectins are kind of one of the prime causes of leaky gut and things like that. So, and then the mast cells overreact to try and sort of combat,
gluten,
because again, gluten, gluten intolerance and so on and so forth. In fact, people might be interested to know that the lectin in the lectin in grain is in gluten grains is the actual gluten. And what have they done? They've bred high gluten grains to make bread light and fluffy, and so it's kind of amplifying the damage that could be potentially done.
The gluten will be digested one step, and then what's left is a protein called gliadin, and humans cannot digest gliadin, and so the gliadin has been found to damage the intestinal lining of all human beings. It causes it causes intestinal permeability. So you start getting fecal matter, undigested food particles getting into the bloodstream, and the more gluten you eat, like these vegans who are feeding their families seitan to mimic chicken, what their body's obviously craving meat, probably because of nutritional deficiencies and just a natural craving. Instead, they're consuming a protein that they can't completely digest and causes leaky gut in every human being. And then,
this is proven. We know this is proven. There are studies that show that it causes leaky gut, and then again, you'll see health bodies saying, "Oh, but that's only a problem if you've got inflammatory bowel disease." Well, hello, isn't that potentially a cause of the inflammatory bowel disease? And I know for a fact, being in carnivore, following a lot of the carnivore doctors and the carnivore groups, that there are people that are just in remission from inflammatory bowel disease, because it's one of the quickest diseases to cure by cutting out the irritants and the toxins in your diet by going carnivore, because you've got such a high turnover of cells in the gut. And there's a clinic called Paleomedicina where they treat people with keto but mainly carnivore, I think, and they said they get patients into remission very, very quickly if they've got inflammatory bowel disease.
So it sounds like what happened. Let me ask first, was there a period of time where you actually called yourself a vegan? You labeled yourself a vegan? Okay.
Well, I can't say I labeled myself as a vegan, because I didn't really buy into the whole cult.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I would say I was following a vegan diet.
So how
Yes, I
long
thought I was.
how long do you remember where you just had cut out meat completely? Any kind of animal
Um,
product?
Probably
Milk,
about
eggs,
18 months. Probably
18
18
months.
months. Yeah, but
Okay.
but that was kind of the nail in the coffin, really. But I was um, probably eating a largely vegan diet. I didn't like eggs. I, I'd, I couldn't eat, let me think about this. So the period being vegan meant I became lactose intolerant, so I couldn't eat dairy. I wasn't really eating dairy much prior to going vegan anyway. So yeah, probably about 18 months leading up to when I had to have my gallbladder removed. And then I went back to kind of a similar way of eating as I had before, which was quite low meat, low, you know, low animal products. Yeah, and it did turn out that I was actually allergic to egg white and I was allergic to casein in dairy. So all of this really kind of just screwed everything up anyway. So
Do you think that some of these allergies can go away if you've got all of your nutrients in your optimal
um,
range?
well, I know for a fact that the reactions can be extremely reduced by nutrient sufficiency. The big one for me was copper, which is the helps your body create diamine oxidase and break down histamine.
Yeah, I
And
was
I have,
just in contact with a vegan the other day that was claiming that
yeah,
the copper in meat was toxic, and that's one of the reasons why people
no,
should avoid
no.
meat.
Again, I'm in a copper group as well, where they take massive amounts because it helps you detox from things like water contaminants,
So
fluoride, and things like that.
copper is paramount for detoxification.
Yeah. So my nutritionist said to me, you have to eat organ meat and grass-fed liver, um, which was quite hard for me because I hated it, but I persevered and it
How
did
often
make
do
a
you
difference.
eat it
I
now?
actually eat it every day now, every single day. I have I got used to it in the end and I sort of came to miss it if I didn't have it. So, but I only have a small amount because liver, it's naturally sort of high in histamine and, so I lightly cook it, and only have a small amount, but I just know that it's very nutrient dense and it contains copper. That said, I did still have to take copper supplements. So I'm on about 6 milligrams, not what's the recommended allowance. I can't remember. There's something like a tenth of that. So yeah, I take 6 milligrams and I know that it worked to reduce the allergy reactions and the histamine reactions because I introduced that on its own. And then, so I got very good at sort of elimination and re-challenge. So that was the only thing that I changed in my diet. And I gradually built up to the 6 milligrams. And then I tested it out, went out for a meal. I had curry, which was probably one of the worst things I'd had. Yeah, minimal reaction, much less reaction than just a couple of weeks prior. So yeah, it does. I don't know whether I still need to carry on that supplementation, but I feel good on it. And
Are you still going to this functional nutritionist?
Just occasionally. So we're doing a retest on my mycotoxin levels and my iodine levels to make sure that they're up to speed, or if I've got any sort of other questions, then yeah, I deal with it. But yeah, I haven't seen them in the last 6 months, so it was just I've completed the 6 months of the detox protocol. So we're just going to retest those.
How did you said that? I think you said that he didn't rely on serum or blood
Yeah,
tests for vitamins. He
yeah,
had a series of tests that would tell you whether or not you really had a functional deficiency in
yeah.
any
So
nutrient.
yes, so the I can't remember what they were. Let me just look back. So the copper. So he would look at symptoms. So we didn't test anything by any means. He was looking at symptoms, and then for copper, I actually had. He said, well, one of the major symptoms of copper deficiency is histamine intolerance. So I'd also had some blood test done by my GP, and it showed I had neutropenia and leukopenia, which is low white blood cells and low what's the word?
Leukocytes.
Leucos, it might be leukocytes, leukopenia, neutropenia, neutrophils, and oh, anyways, whatever they are. Anybody can Google that, and that is a sign of deficiency. My doctor didn't pick this up. It was only later when I was sending my nutritionist the blood tests I'd had done that he said, well, you're abnormal levels of whatever they're called, leukopenia and neutropenia, and that's a sign of copper deficiency. And the magnesium, he did a red blood cell magnesium test, which shows what's getting into the cell, and that showed deficiency. So rather than just my standard blood tests were normal from my doctor. Yeah, the iodine, he did a urine test, a 24-hour urine test, and what else? Zinc. Yeah,
So
the lower levels. Pardon?
do you have plans to go? Are there any tests that, or I guess he's not doing tests, but since you're doing these supplements, you're following a dietary protocol, getting the plants out of your diet, getting the
Yeah.
cytotoxins out, and so these symptoms that he's matched with nutritional deficiencies, they're slowly
Yeah.
but surely going away.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the symptoms are pretty much gone. You know, I'm symptom free the majority of the time. I think I do still have a slight issue with histamine, you know, but it's a delayed reaction. It's much milder. I'm not getting all the, you know, at the worst it might be you know, like I had a steak the other weekend and I had like mild mouth irritation, burning, nose, eyes, but that was it. So and it's also so I eventually put myself on the carnivore diet because I couldn't do the gut protocols that he recommended because they largely involved bone broth. He said that's very high in histamine. Try bone stock. I got some very fresh chicken, frozen, you know, immediately by the supplier. I put it into the pot, boiling pot, frozen, cooked it for 1 hour to get a bone stock, and it still gave me like quite bad diarrhea. So in the end, I just thought, and some of the plants that he said were less likely to be toxic, like squashes and things that have got hard shells and less natural plant toxins in. I was allergic to squash. So I thought, oh, do you know, I'm just gonna go carnivore and give that a try. And it's been much better for me.
How
And
long has
also
it been that you've been plant free?
a year and a little
Okay.
bit, a few months. That's not to say that I don't occasionally have some plants if I'm eating out, just for social, so I don't look like a freak. And so I might have a little bit of something, but I now realize how much some of these plants are actually doing me harm, because so when you've completely eliminated them, it's almost like your body kind of goes, thank God for that. It works really hard to try and work against the problems these substances are causing. And then so if you eliminate them, it relaxes, you can heal. And then if you suddenly try them again, so do a re-challenge, you get almost worse symptoms back very quickly. So it's really clear then what the issues were. So over Christmas, I went out for dinner with family, and I had a lamb tagine. So lamb, yes, it was probably slow cooked, but I did take an antihistamine beforehand, just as a precaution. And the tagine is like cooked in spices and red, I think like sweet peppers and tomatoes, and I had we call potato chips, fries with it, and those the peppers, the potatoes, and the some of the spices are actually have got a lectin called what's it called? Is it nightshade? No. Yeah, nightshade vegetables. They're all nightshades, aren't they? And again, we're told they're such minimal amounts, they've been bred to be sort of low, they don't do us any harm. But I'm telling you, the day after I had that, I woke up in quite severe joint pain, like muscle contraction joint pain, and the most horrific ocular disturbances. So like big scintillating brightly coloured kaleidoscope ocular stones. I couldn't stand up. I had to lie down. I mean, it did clear after about an hour, but I had to lie down in a darkened room. And I've never had that, except for when one time when I was very, very stressed and I shouted at my ex-husband. And so I knew it was stress related, but I hadn't had any, mental stress. I had a lovely time with my family. So it was a stress from what I'd eaten. And it came back the next day as well. I woke up the next day with it. Not quite so bad, but it took days to get over the joint and muscle pain. And that's one thing I thought I was stuck with forever. I've had it all my life. I am quite hypermobile, so I thought, it's due to that. But I've been really largely pain-free since I've been off plants and carnivore and increased nutrients. So
okay, yeah, it sounds like you might still have some borderline deficiencies, but I mean, I'm just wondering why it's so easy for you to go like if you have a little bit of the wrong thing, you have these
but I think what it is these things were have been in my diet so long, my body was working at at an elevated level to try and get rid of them and try and sort of manage them. And I don't know how many of your viewers are carnivore or follow the carnivore diet, but if you watch Anthony Chaffee's video, "The Plants Are Trying to Kill You," it makes perfect sense that actually they aren't these plant toxins like your lectins and your nightshades and what have you. If you suddenly stick them in your diet, you get like a poisoning reaction. It's that simple. We accept kind of a especially as we get older, we accept a lower level of health and well-being.
Sure.
I'd accepted I'm stuck with this joint pain for the rest of my life, and it's going to get worse, and joint and muscle pain and muscle spasms and all sorts. So but I now know it wasn't it wasn't my joints, it was the food I was eating in all likelihood.
Right.
So I
think that the modern aging process is largely symptoms of these plant toxins, mycotoxins, nutrient deficiencies, lack of movement. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, and of course, the medical community has just accepted all of these ailments as part of the aging process.
Yeah.
And rather than like this functional nutritionist that you went to, where he looks at your symptoms and says, how can I match this symptom with any of the symptoms that we know come along with certain nutrient deficiencies?
Yeah.
Whereas a medical doctor would never do that. He would say, here's the symptom. What drugs can I prescribe to mask this?
Yeah. And of course, drugs are toxins. So you just end up making it worse. You get more. And again, if your toxin breakdown is compromised, then you get worse and worse problems, end up taking more drugs. So it's just, people need to actually take responsibility for their health. And, if I can avoid it, I'm never going to set foot in a doctor's office ever again. I've become so awake to the whole, pharma cartel and lack of education in, medicine, that, I've come to the conclusion that all disease, from everything I've read stacks and stacks of stuff, it all goes back to nutrient deficiencies, toxin overload, or injury, obviously, and that's it.
So it sounds like you started out with a genetic variation that inhibits your ability to absorb nutrients from plants.
Yeah. Very common. Yeah, very common.
Yeah, 40% of the population.
Yeah.
So like 40%.
Certainly, I think the MTHFR one is about 40%. I think the DAO is similar. I can't remember all of them, but these will be very common. These are, because we have evolved in, as I said, in this clean, green, pesticide-free, toxin-free environment, and not eating much plant food. We've got the evidence that in bone isotope studies that we didn't eat much plant matter. It was primarily meat. They can see that in the bone isotopes.
Oh yeah.
The nitrogen levels. So, our evolution is basically as meat eaters, with potentially a little bit of plants to stave off starvation if we couldn't get meat, if we couldn't, hunt meat.
Yeah, it was a supplemental source of nutrition, and it was a minimal, and there was seasonable availability to these foods as well.
Yeah,
so it wasn't year round.
And they weren't, bred to be big and fat and juicy, and roots would have been not worth the effort. Root vegetables would have been little skinny roots. Why would you wouldn't have put any effort into digging those up, unless you were starving. Fruits would be small and bitter, and in the wild, you might, as you say, very seasonal. So it's just, who do we think we are, to think we can change our evolutionary diet? No other animal does this. They all eat their evolutionary diet because that's how they've evolved. That's what they've evolved to obtain their nutrients from. So how arrogant are we to think we can just switch that up for, a plant-based diet?
Yeah, well, our physiology is carnivore, obviously. I mean, our digestive system is
Mm.
basically identical to that of a wolf. And, wolves will eat berries
Mm.
seasonally. If they find a berry patch in the woods when they're ripe and and available, but that window of availability is maybe a couple of weeks every year. And
Yeah.
so, and the same thing with the nuts and so forth. I've read all the studies on the Native American Indians eating pecans, and they would actually
Hmm.
ferment. They would
Yeah.
ferment the pecan. So a lot of the foods that we historically would eat as hunter gatherers, we were
Yeah.
fermenting them. We were, taking certain precautions, just like
Yeah.
breads, sourdough isn't.
Yeah.
We
It's
didn't invent
fermented.
sourdough because we wanted another flavor of bread. We invented it because we learned through our sensitivity to the anti-nutrients there that fermenting that dough would actually
Mm.
make the bread less toxic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And even today, if you go to Mediterranean countries and you get a salad, they will take the skin off the cucumbers, the seeds out of the cucumbers, the skin off the peppers and tomatoes, the seeds out, because those are the most toxic parts of the plant. And we don't do that mostly.
yeah, I I remember back before I learned all of this, I would go to a restaurant and they had started serving fried potato skins, and these were potato skins fried in some type of
Yeah,
seed
I
oil,
remember that. Yeah,
and
we
the
used to have those.
skin is where all of the plant toxins are really
Mm.
concentrated, and it's just amazing how our food culture around the world, except for the areas where they're still largely hunter gatherers, where
Yeah,
the rest of the world, the developed world, the the diet has just been completely
yeah,
perverted, and it's like we're all a bunch of fish out of water because
yeah,
a fish
absolutely.
belongs in the water, and human beings belong to a primarily a carnivore diet.
Yeah. And there's a lot, you hear a lot about the, gut health. You've got to have your fiber and fruits and veg for gut health. It's just a load of rubbish. It really is.
Yeah, well, no one
Um,
who's on a carnivore diet ever gets constipated that I
no,
know of. And
no,
if you look into the literature on why fiber gets you moving,
it's
is
irritated.
because the cellulose, the non-soluble fiber irritates the mucosal tissues, and as a defense reaction to that, there's mucus that is secreted to create
Mm.
a barrier between the damaging sticks and twigs and your delicate
Yeah,
intestinal wall. And then,
yeah,
in order to get that out, then the peristalsis begins to work overtime to try to get that on out of here so that we can
yeah.
minimize the damage. And you've got vegans who are and just regular omnivores that are eating fiber every day because they've been told that it
Mm.
keeps you regular, and so that causes a chronic a chronic case of bowel irritation, which has been
Mm.
proven to lead to polyps, and polyps often become cancerous.
Yeah.
So it. I don't know if you've read any of my community posts about the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, but
Yeah, I think
that's
I've
the
seen some of
organization that
it.
vegans are constantly
Yeah.
citing an old expired position paper that they refused to renew.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why they refused to renew it is because Susan Levin, which one of the primary scientists that published that paper, which was, veganism is appropriate for all humans and all stages of life, kind of thing. She died of colon cancer at the age of 51. you know, and vegans will say, well, it's an anecdote. Well, it's a
Yeah.
pretty powerful anecdote because this is one of the people that was telling the world
Promoting. Yeah.
that this
And
was appropriate for all stages of human existence.
And typically with diverticular disease, my sister-in-law's father had diverticular disease, and he was told no fiber in your diet. You know,
Yeah,
if it was so bad for you, why would they be giving that advice? And I've seen studies where chronic constipation has gone into remission in 100% of the patients who cut fiber out of their diet. And
yeah,
you know, those that reduced it a bit had slightly improved, but those in the control group had no change. So yeah,
yeah.
it's just a load
For
of
people who
rubbish.
don't know what diverticulitis
Yeah.
is sort of like an aneurysm on your gut. An aneurysm on, say, your aorta, which is your major blood artery, is sort of like if you've seen those frogs when they go ribbit and that the skin
Really
stretches out. It
expand.
looks like it's about to burst and then it comes back. So that's what happens with that can happen with your arteries. It can also happen with your intestines. And so your intestines get this weak spot in there. And if anyone's ever played with like a balloon where you squeeze the balloon, it's got some either air or water in it, and one side you keep stretching it, and eventually that will burst. And so that happens with the aorta, happens with the intestines, and you know what happens is the poop is moving through there. It's got too much bulk, and so it's causing a stretching of the tissues, and every day stretching of the tissues, and that becomes a pocket where that matter can get trapped in there, and that's what they call diverticulitis. And that's when they finally pull the fiber away from you and say you got to cut back on the fiber. Where doesn't it make sense that the fiber would be the cause of the diverticulitis?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know, there are populations who are entirely carnivore and they don't have, you know, they have very diverse gut bacteria. And I've read that you can increase your gut bacteria diversity just by going for a walk in a wood or, you know, park or, you know, gardening. So we know so little about the gut, you know, it's that research is just in its infancy at the moment. So I just, you know, dismiss all of that with a pinch of salt, really.
Yeah, I think
And as
that
I say, my gut issues have cleared up.
good. I do believe that the bacteria that are populating your gut biome will affect your cravings. And so if you've got bacteria there that are primarily sugar feeding bacteria, then you'll get the message that you need to eat more sugar. And that's why I find it, you know, when they talk about probiotics, I find it strange that people would choose something like kombucha, for instance, because that is a type of biotic that would be feeding on sugar. And so if you're going to populate your gut with kombucha microorganisms, then I think you're setting yourself up to have these huge sugar cravings. Whereas when you stop eating the excess sugar and starch and eat a meat-centered diet, then the microbiome will stop. You'll stop getting these messages to go eat sugar.
Yeah, and I did actually try adding fruit for a bit, the sorts of fruit that I could that I wasn't allergic to and I could tolerate. But I would have because sometimes, you know, I always like strong flavors, spicy flavors, sharp flavors. So sometimes it is quite nice to have a bit of fruit, but I would then crave more of it. Whereas I don't crave anything really, you know, I don't think about eating, I don't snack, I don't need to, you know, I fast until, I don't know, 1, 2 o'clock, and then I eat lunch, I suppose, and then dinner. Sometimes I go all day. I don't, if I'm out at an event or something, and that I know that there, it's going to be limited what I can eat because I am allergic to eggs, wheat, and dairy, amongst a million other things. Then I'll just go all day, and I do not get blood sugar crashes. I do not feel hungry, because we didn't evolve to get up and eat breakfast cereal or toast in the morning. We had to go out and hunt it and catch it. So, it's another thing that makes complete sense that, this is a healthy way to be. Another observation is that being a woman in her 50s, I'm sort of concerned about bone density and, maintaining muscle mass and all of that. So before I became meat-centric and carnivore, I was doing a small amount of resistance training. I admit nothing major, but, I do some every day, push-ups, press-ups, squats, lunges, sit-ups. I barely had any muscle tone, and I was eating quite a lot of plant protein. And now I still do the same exercise, and I've built far more muscle than I ever had.
Yeah, well, that's how often do you do resistance exercise?
Probably a little bit every day. As I say, like 10 press-ups, squats, lunges, some, not every day, but most days I do, other than that, I do a bit of cycling, a bit of hiking. So that's about it. But I now have biceps and, toned muscle. So.
I was trying to get that. It looks like you're very active.
Yeah, when I can be. Yeah. I do like to get out, be in a natural environment and, big, wide landscapes. So, yeah.
And you know how to surf? Is that right?
No, I'm not surfing. That was just bodyboarding.
Bodyboarding, okay.
I was rubbish at surfing.
Yeah. Now, the last time I went bodyboarding was in the coast off of New York, near the Hamptons, and the beach there is the sand. It's very coarse.
Yeah.
And this big wave came in and washed me way up on the beach, and then it just kind of dumped me on my chest, and I woke up I stood up, and my nipples were just about gone because the sand had removed them.
Yeah.
So I had the little streams of blood running down. It was pretty painful. But I wanted to ask, did your son ever suffer from any of the ailments that you?
Yeah.
And has he also moved to a carnivore diet?
Well, I've moved him to a carnivore diet. He, I gradually kind of included a bit of, meat in ways that I could sort of disguise it. And as he got a bit older, he still he decided he quite liked a burger or a sausage. He's never been one to eat meat, like off the bone kind of meat, it's always mushed up and minced or whatever, but he does eat quite a lot more now, because he decided he wanted to, do a bit of bodybuilding, a bit of working out, and he needed more protein. So, so I said, here you go then. So, and he's been studying for his A-level exams over here. So I've been cooking lunches and things for him. He's 18 now, so he's perfectly old enough to do his own, but it was just a way of making sure that he was eating more meat, and I've upped the meat content of meals, and he was very, very skinny, he's 6 foot tall, and there was no muscle on him prior. Now, yes, he's working out as well, but he's got a good sort of level of muscle for not very huge amount of effort. So but yeah, he used to suffer from allergies. He what did we? I think it was. I gave him a fruit smoothie when he was quite little, probably about 3. He wanted some. I was just using up fruit, and he wanted some. And he just had it. I said, "Well, try it." And he took a teaspoon and started screeching and trying to claw at his mouth, and his mouth, the lips all swelled, and his mouth was all like rashy, and it was. I think it was a kiwi fruit in there. That was the only one kiwi in about 2 liters of fruit. And then he started suffering from asthma, viral related, but it could be set off by what do you call it? Cold, like really cold, foggy days, and hay fever, and that would set off the asthma. He is better, he's definitely much more tolerant now. He's got more meat in his diet, but he's still a little bit prone to the allergy, occasionally gets asthma if he exerts himself a lot, but he plays football most of the time and doesn't have a problem. It does get hay fever still, but yeah. And I think some of it could be due to maternal deficiency because I have got this gene variant, which means you don't absorb folate and folic acid from supplements, and I wasn't, or from plants, and I wasn't having a whole lot of meat even when I was pregnant. I probably had a little bit more, and I was supplementing, but not red meat. In fact, strangely, this is really weird, because I wasn't somebody who really liked red meat at one time. Well, most of my adult life I wouldn't eat it, and I got really strong cravings for red meat, and the bloodier the better. And I was like a vampire at one time. And then my blood test showed I was actually anemic then. So I think sometimes you kind of, whatever goes before is very hard. When you're pregnant, what the baby's exposed to or not exposed to can then set you up for maybe lifelong problems. He's actually got ADHD as well, so and that is sort of linked to maternal deficiencies as well, anemia, low folate and things like that. So yeah, so I think that and they've shown that indigenous communities who eat meat have much healthier like jaws. Oh wait, the other thing he's got is a tongue tie. In my family we've all got tongue ties, and that's linked to low folate. So indigenous communities actually get much better jaw development, and they don't need to have teeth removed and things like that. All their wisdom teeth come in. I think we're sort of generationally causing issues by the Western diet.
Yeah. I wanted to just talk a little bit about, I asked you earlier about if your son had been exposed to Walt Disney movies like Bambi, and you said yes.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know the history behind that. Are you aware of the Seventh-day Adventists and their agenda?
I am now. Yes, I am now.
Okay, so the Seventh-day Adventists, the original doctors that were associated with them was Dr. Kellogg, Dr. Post from Post Toasties, and Dr. Graham from the Graham Cracker. And they were all grain moguls. They were selling. They were also pastors. So they were heavily involved in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they were trying to convince everyone to consume a plant-based diet that revolved around grains, especially the grains that they sold as cereal. Yeah. So Walt Disney actually got his start with Post drawing animals for the front of the cereal boxes. So he made his first $1 million working for the cereal industry post Kellogg and Graham. And here, I'll pull this up. So John Harvey Kellogg was, let me change the format here. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. They all were, all these cereal moguls. And so you've heard of the anthropomorphization of animals, giving animals human characteristics.
Right, yeah. I wasn't aware of the link there between the Seventh-day Adventists. That's really interesting. Yeah,
yes,
so I can sort of see how they've infiltrated our, diets through our children.
Yeah, and you can, here, I'll show you, this is Advent Health. So that's the Adventist medicine, which is all vegan. And so the Seventh-day Adventists are the official medical team for Walt Disney around the world. And so I won't get into the whole story, but it's all documented. And Edward Bernays, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was also played a part here. But all of these movies and books like Charlotte's Web, Bambi, the list goes on and on of these Walt Disney movies, which is actually a Seventh-day Adventist organization. And what they're trying to do with these movies like Bambi is trying to create ethical vegans by pulling on those emotional heartstrings.
Yeah.
Demonizing really hunters
sinister.
And giving human qualities to what have always been human prey animals.
Yeah.
So I would discourage parents who have young children from indoctrinating them with these movies like Bambi, because they don't know what they're doing. They could actually cause their child to have an aversion to eating meat.
Like my son. Yeah, exactly.
And lead to health problems. That's not to say I'm not arguing for torturing animals.
No.
A vegan wants to say, well, if you don't want to be kind to animals, that means you hate animals. You want to torture animals. No, what that means is that I don't want to give human qualities to animals. I don't want people to become sick on a plant-based diet.
Yeah.
That's all.
It's quite insidious, really, what the so I was aware of the Seventh-day Adventists from a point of view that they started up health centres and hospitals and started all the research, which is used, for most of our dietary research and diet plans and so on and so forth, just as a way of kind of infiltrating, this is healthy, and of course all their studies are based on people that are Seventh-day Adventists and have very healthy lifestyles, so is it the lifestyle, or is it the the fact that they're not smoking and drinking to any great degree? And there's so little sort of decent research into what constitutes a healthy diet, and it's so influenced by the Seventh-day Adventist vegan agenda. It's just crazy.
Well, it's like the American Nutrition and Dietetic Association. That is a blatant Seventh-day Adventist organization. So any position paper opinion that they have about diet is going to be affected by their religious views. And then you get into, I was talking to a vegan the other day, and he said, well, I see what you're showing me, because I was showing him all of this science on the mycotoxins, et cetera. He said, but the science that's coming out, these studies that are being published, seems like they all endorse a vegan diet. And, started showing him the funding. The funding is
Yeah.
PepsiCo,
Yeah.
Kraft, General Mills, Pfizer Pharmaceuticals,
Mm.
you know, and then you have to go the extra mile and show them the studies that prove, because they want to call you a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah. It's the
But the
same in the
studies are
UK.
there that show that
Yeah.
the money affects the outcome of these studies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know the British, I think it's British Dietetic Society or Association, have Coca-Cola as one of their funding. And they actually used to have a can of Coke on their Eat Well plate or whatever it's called. Um, so they're not gonna demonize any products produced by these companies. I haven't really gone into the all of the funding, but I don't need to really. I know the sort of mess that we're in, really.
Yeah, I don't know if you've looked into the WEF
Oh yeah,
much, but all of the
yeah. So
meat. Go ahead.
yeah, no. So I kind of started to gradually wake up to what was going, and it was all because of what had gone on with my health and how mainstream health wasn't helping me and didn't have a clue, and all the corruption with pharmaceuticals and just piling one medication on top of another and not getting to root causes. And then it kind of led and spiraled into really waking me up to everything that's going on with the WEF and what they want to do with what they want to push through with net zero, which
Yeah, they
is
want to take the
ridiculous.
meat. They want to take the meat out of our
Yeah.
diets.
Yeah, and it's in the net zero guidelines that that the UK have signed up to, that they're going to get rid of lamb and beef, which is the mainstay of my diet, because I don't have much beef, but I have a lot of lamb. And this is for a country that contributes, probably, I like to say 1%, but it could be less, to carbon emissions. Not that carbon is an issue, not that we really have much warming other than the sort of natural cycle, we have some of the most efficient agricultural, animal agricultural systems for lamb and beef production, because our climate is cold, wet and humid and damp, and grass grows all year round, and lamb is just probably in this country is probably almost the what's the opposite, has got a climate sink, a carbon sink, because they just are fed on grass, and that's it. They poop on the grass, and the grass gets fed, well, as with your agricultural methods. So and the same, in Ireland, they've leaked a government document, to say that they're going to cull, is it 600,000 cows in the next few years or something? I don't know if that's been firmed up, but it's just, anybody can see that it's worse than stupid. It's insidious. There is no rational way that they could think that, there's no way that they could think this is a good idea, put the country into sort of less food security for this fictional net zero aim, this ridiculous, because Ireland contributes even less than the UK, probably are, they just haven't done the research on carbon sinks versus carbon emissions, even if carbon were an issue, and there's constant reports coming out that actually the world is greening, as you would expect if we had higher carbon, and that the carbon, the increased carbon is actually following the temperature, not the other way around, not causing it. The carbon increase is following the temperature increase. we've got increased ice in the, was it the Arctic? Yeah, I think it's the Arctic.
Yeah.
And the proper climate scientists, rather than people that are just weathermen, will tell you that the climate is warming because of where they place the measurement. And big towns and cities have grown up. It's on airports where the flights incoming and all the heat generated is increasing. And actually, if they take the temperature back to, I think NASA changed the temperature assessment from something like from 1880 onwards. But if you go back, we had higher temperatures or as high temperatures as we did now. And then if you look at it long term, we're in one of the lowest temperatures that the world has been through. And we've had far greater carbon naturally in the environment, and very lush green landscapes. And they can tell that from all of the deposition of, plants and, other deposits. So yeah, the whole thing is just a mess. But it does worry me because, having woken up to all this, and my diet is meat, and there are so many people that are just so blind to what's going on. Yeah, it is quite a concern. And of course, everything's censored. So if I posted anything on Facebook to my, friends and family on Facebook, it doesn't get seen. It's just suppressed. So anything about, any of these controversial subjects. So.
Well, here's an example of JBS is the top beef distributor in the world. And so they're the number one distributor in most of the developed world for beef. And they have also signed on all of the big meat suppliers. It doesn't matter whether it's JBS, McDonald's, Tyson Foods, Cargill. They've all signed on as strategic partners with the WEF, which is this organization that's got this big anti-meat agenda. And so, a lot of people are not waking up to the fact that the people that are supplying the supermarket meats, like JBS, they're actually spearheading the plant-based analog fake meat market.
Yeah.
And so they're positioning themselves to eventually stop supplying meat to the populations. And already they've
got their replacement.
Yeah, the plant-based replacements, even though they're not selling, because a vegan will tell you, well, of course they're going to do that. They want in on the profits too. But the problem is that all of these plant-based, as long as meat is available, these plant-based meat companies are going to fail. Beyond Meat is being sued by its investors, a class action lawsuit, because they lied to their investors about the growth opportunity there. Yeah. So there's really no profit in it until they remove the meat.
The meat.
But for the product that they do sell, the profit margin is more than twice what they can get when they sell real meat. So that's one of the motivations for JBS and some of these other meat companies to transition is that if they can stop supplying meat and replace all of that with a profit margin that's twice that of meat, then they will, they'll be twice as profitable. And plus there's corporate alliances between companies like JBS, Kraft, General Mills, Cargill, and big pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer. And so the pharmaceutical industry would stand to benefit from a meatless diet, as well as your story.
Because we're all sick and it makes us all sick and ill, and
regarding the carbon issue, I don't know if you've heard me talk about this before, but one of the primary carbon emission sources is from the the crop, the monocrop tillage,
Yeah.
because every time they till the soil, it causes a bacterial bloom, which causes a
Yeah.
huge carbon burp out of the soil
Mm.
into the
Yeah.
atmosphere. And I really don't think that the carbon being in the atmosphere is an issue at all. The
No.
issue is that now the carbon is no longer in the soil, because when you have carbon in the soil, every time you increase carbon in the soil, it increases the absorbability of
Of
water.
water.
So it's
Yeah.
better at absorbing water, and it holds water longer. So
Yeah.
in other words, it becomes more friendly to any type of plants that would want to grow in that soil.
Mm.
And also, by driving this heavy equipment over it all the time, plowing and planting and pesticiding, uh, under that layer where they're tilling it becomes compacted. It's almost like a layer of
Yeah.
Teflon, about a
Yeah. So
foot.
you get
It becomes
massive runoff.
it's called hard pan, right? And so the water can't absorb into the ground anymore, and so it runs off into the low spots and causes flooding, and
Mm.
also causes a lot of these agrochemicals to the toxic runoff becomes amplified. And then the other
Mm.
thing that happens is that now the sun is, you've got millions and millions and millions of acres of these monocrops that get tilled up. So now you've got bare soil
Mm.
exposed to the sun, which
Yeah.
the sun now is bearing down straight up on the soil. The
Basically
soil
burning.
it's really hot. It kills all of the soil life along with all the chemicals they're spraying. And then
Yeah.
this hot soil creates these convection currents, these hot winds that are blowing straight up into the atmosphere, and it actually will dry up and blow away what otherwise would be a rain event. So there's
Mm.
lots of rain that we're not getting anymore because of these convection currents caused by the tillage that grows the crops for the products that end up on the vegan menu. It's actually causing the climate change, which isn't so much global warming, but global desertification. Everything's
Yeah.
turning into a
Yeah.
desert. And
Yeah.
this is because of crop agriculture. It doesn't have anything to do with livestock.
No, and I thank God for people like, I've looked at some of Alan Savory's work and, other regenerative agriculture. So, thank God for people like you actually trying to get the message out there. And, but I don't know. I don't kind of know whether it's enough now, whether we're too far down the route of governments kind of getting a hold of, the land and dictating net zero, because there's a lot of talk about rewilding land, common land that we've in the UK we've grazed sheep on for probably 1,000 years, if not more, and they want to rewild it now. So it's taking away common land that was available to farmers for grazing sheep and cattle and goats and things, and now they want to turn it over to rewilding. Because it's more land, I can sort of see, but it's almost like just another way that they're trying to do a land grab and put us into, demonize animal agriculture and make our diets more deficient, and it's all kind of seems to be, part of the same puzzle.
Well, if you look at these rewilding projects,
They don't work.
They're
incompetent.
What they'll do is they'll increase the desertification, because they're taking the only thing that's on that land right now, which is the ruminant animals, which are sequestering oxygen or sequestering carbon back into the soil. So, there's in these rewilding, what they're talking about is trying to grow forests, in places where there weren't forests before. It was grassland.
Thousands of years. Yeah,
it was grass prairie, and in order for that to work, you've got to have huge herds of ruminant animals roaming around, migrating with the seasons, migrating with the rainfall. And then those ruminant animals have to have predator pressure in order to keep them bunched together so that they're depositing the fertilizer and urine, which is a source of water for the plants. Without the predators, then these ruminant animals spread out and they stand a distance from each other, and you don't get the same type of huge flourishing plants that happen after they move on. And so there, you don't see any of this talk with these rewilding projects. The way that they're engineering their rewilding is a recipe for more desert.
Yeah, I just want to leave it, to do its own thing, and you just get all sorts of plant species overtaking that aren't kept under control by grazing and all sorts. It's just ridiculous. And as you say, losing the the source of fertilization that that keeps the biodiversity and the other animals on the land, and it's just, the whole thing is just absolutely crazy.
Yes. Well, do you have any I think was the first time you commented on my channel, was it about the mycotoxins?
I might have commented on other people's comments or something. I can't remember now.
Okay. Well, I've had people for years asking me to make a video about mycotoxins, and I've always intended on it. You were the first person that had actually had a confirmed brush with the damage caused by mycotoxins.
But there are a lot of us, about an awful lot of us. The trouble is, it's not well recognized. So you end up with people doing their own research and sharing knowledge in Facebook groups and things like that. But there is a lot of information from alternative nutritionists and alternative health practitioners about mycotoxin damage now, much more than they used to be, I think. So awareness is growing. And a good one to, if people are interested, is Judy Cho, Nutrition with Judy. So she does do meat-based healing, but she has quite a number of interviews with people on mycotoxins. So, and also Paul Saladino has interviewed, I can't remember the name of the chap, but he's known as the mold guy on the interview. So there's quite a lot of detailed information about how it comes about and the harms it causes, and remediation and detox protocols and things like that. So so if people are interested, they can probably find stuff on YouTube.
Hopefully there'll be some either would-be vegans or vegans who are suffering from some of these same symptoms that will see this video and hear your story and hopefully follow in your footsteps and remedy.
I hope so. Because it is quite shocking, the information that's out there, that vegan is healthy diets and is a healthy diet and you can get all the nutrition you need. It's just a lie. It's a damn lie,
It's a shame that these vegans, that they try to portray themselves as these compassionate people. When they hear a story like yours, they roll their eyes and they harbor a lot of disdain for you because you're demonizing their religion, and they have absolutely no empathy for you, or they don't want to believe your story. How
No, I've been gaslit so many times by vegans. It's just unreal. It's sort of water off a duck's back, really, because I know what I know and what I've experienced. So, but it's just stupidity, quite frankly. I'm sorry to say that about people, but to actually hear that, my story and the story of many other people, and then dismiss it as you're making it up, or you weren't truly vegan. No, I wasn't truly vegan for a very long time, but I was eating largely vegan, for most of my adult life, and it just made me sicker and sicker.
I've showed my subscribers many times the published information from the United States Department of Agriculture showing that today's standard American diet is 70% plant-based. So it fits the definition of a plant-based diet. It's largely plant-based. So we've never been sicker than we are today. We've never had, a lack of health like we have today.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is because we've never eaten as much plant-sourced foods. We've never, until now, replaced most animal fat with these toxic industrial seed oils. And so, everything except for these so-called authority figures points to the fact that a plant-based diet is unhealthy and disease causing.
And I was eating home cooked food. I wasn't eating processed food. And I will say, my mother, who was sort of very into health and nutrition, and would eat a high amount of. It was all home cooked, quite often homegrown, and she ended up with. She just gained weight. She didn't eat a lot. She did have sort of what she called the whole grains and healthy whole grains as well, but not in any excess. She gained weight. She had raised triglycerides. She had high blood pressure. She was suffering from anxiety attacks, and she eventually got breast cancer, which metastasized, and she died at the age of 60. So this is, yes, she was eating meat, but most of her diet was health. Yeah, most of her diet was fresh fruits and vegetables. And an old boss of mine was vegetarian for a very long time, very fit. She used to go running, walking, hiking, cycling. She was always active, and again, home cooked. She was vegetarian, not vegan, and she died at the age of 50 from an aneurysm. And now, people can say, oh, that's an anecdote, but actually, when you look at the research, if you're vegan or vegetarian, you're more likely to suffer from an aneurysm, from mental health disorders, cancers potentially as well, I think now, because it's very much linked to carbohydrates and sugars, blood, raised blood glucose and all of the metabolic syndrome.
Yeah, that's one of the that really became was a shock whenever I learned how PET scans work when they're trying to find the existence or the location of a cancer tumor in someone. What they'll do is give the patient a dose of slightly radioactive glucose. And so due to the fact that cancer cells thrive on sugar and they have 10 to 20 times more insulin receptors than a regular cell, that they more or less monopolize the glucose in the blood. And that's really one of the things that kills a cancer patient later on in the late stages, is because the rest of the body is being starved of any nutrition. And so when they give a patient this radioactive glucose solution, if there's a tumor anywhere, then all of that glucose will go to one area. And then when they scan the body, that glucose will show up as a hot spot on the scan. And so, that's the first thing that told me, wow, cancer loves sugar, thrives on sugar, and monopolizes the sugar that someone's eating. And so it makes sense that the more, and I see a lot of propaganda right now that's saying no, sugar doesn't cause cancer. And no,
it might not cause it, but
it certainly does
helps it
along,
proliferate.
doesn't it?
there's loads of research out there now with, was it Robert Lustig and Jason Fung and all, numerous doctors and researchers, Dr. Ben Bickman, and they're all saying the same thing. We need to cut out the carbohydrates, significantly cut down the carbohydrates.
Right.
And I've never been I used to get breast cysts, and I believe it, from research, I know it's linked to iodine deficiency, and so is breast cancer, and so is any of the sexual organ cancers, prostate and ovarian, and all of that are linked to iodine deficiency. And they know this because the Japanese who eat high levels of iodine in their diets have much lower incidence of all those diseases. But yeah, despite my mum's history, my cousin as well, when I've had breast cysts, I've refused a mammogram because, why would you want to irradiate your breasts if you've got a cancer? Why would you want to squash the tissues just, so the cancer cells get dispersed? And I've come into quite some, I've only ever had what's it called? A scan where they run the probe over the area, whatever it's called, ultrasound. And I've had quite a telling off from the cancer nurses and all sorts, but since I'm iodine sufficient now, I have no breast cysts, no issues. They all went very rapidly. Yeah,
it's crazy that I think that there's a silent epidemic of iodine deficiency out there. I think it's gotten a lot worse over recent years, partly because there's a lot of propaganda out there telling people to stop consuming iodized table salt. Not that that's the best source of iodine.
No.
But it might be the only source of iodine in someone's diet. And when you tell them to get away from that and go to something like Celtic sea salt or any type of pink salt that's not supplemented with iodine, then it's it seems to me that would be a road towards breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cysts, etc. Prostate cancer. All of these reproductive glands require more iodine than a regular body cell.
So I think the whole of our health industry is just broken, really, and we need to be responsible for our own health and not put it in the hands of people who want to keep us sick. And
it doesn't make any sense to rely on someone who makes a profit when you're sick and does not make a profit when you're healthy. So it makes sense that we should be critical of things that these profiteers are telling us.
I mean, that's not that doctors over here make profits out of drugs, but we only get the research from the pharmaceutical companies. There's no research in natural remedies. There's barely any training from most doctors and medical professionals, and they only look at their own specialism. So I had all these symptoms going on, and I went to see an allergist, I went to see an oral health specialist, I went to see a dietitian. It just, nobody joins up all the dots like a functionally trained doctor or nutritionist does.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I guess we can wrap it up here, Lisa. I really appreciate you coming on with me today, giving us your story of how you discovered the mycotoxins and your brush with veganism. You're a beautiful 56. You still have a very youthful look to you. Probably has something to do with your meat-based diet that you're on right now.
Yeah, I think it's made quite a difference. If you looked at me a couple of years ago, I did not look well. So it's definitely helped in all ways, shape, and form. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you're still active and that your son is doing well. And I hope that you'll keep in touch, and maybe in the future we can do another live stream and
yeah,
talk some more about some of these issues. Okay. Thank you all for showing up. That was our ex-vegan guest, Lisa, and I thought it went great. She had a good story to tell us. I hope someone gets something out of that. I did. Um, and again, I love you all. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you.